Well, one of the things that we try to do on this show, recently anyway, is we try to theme our beers towards the movie that we're covering, or at least one of the movies that we're covering, because we typically do 2 episodes per recording session, and this time we said, let's do some movies that they're drinking in the bar scene. And I couldn't get a clear shot of the green beer, the green beer bottles that they're drinking in the bar scene. So I went ahead and picked up some beer in green bottles that I've never had before. And I got this Beck's, which is from Germany. And I got to tell you, man, this is some good beer.
I'm surprised you never had that before.
I have never had it before. I was going to go with the Heineken, but I saw the Beck's and I was like, I've never had Beck's before. I'm going to try that. And so
I do think, looking at the picture, I did look at some more stills of it online as I was researching, and I do think it was probably Heineken that they were drinking. But if you look at some of the stills of the film, you can also see some Budweiser in there. So I've got Bud Light. So I'm pretty close.
That's close enough.
Close enough for this one. This was a hard one, Wasn't like My Bloody Valentine where every 5 minutes there's a commercial for Moosehead beer.
Well, and the movie that we're talking about, this infamous bar scene that we're talking about, is the bar scene that all of the counselors finally get to go burn off some steam before the kids all show up at Camp Crystal Lake in 1981's Friday the 13th Part 2.
Directed by Steve Miner, who also went on in 1998 to do Halloween H2O.
Well, for a second there, I thought you were going to say and went on to do Jason Lives or Jason Goes to Hell.
Nope. Did he do that?
I have no idea.
Oh. No, yeah. Steve Miner he did Part 3 as well. Friday the 13th Part 3, which, the more as time goes on, I think is probably my favorite Friday movie. I don't know. I think that's my go-to Friday movie. Like if I was that one in Part 5, I know everybody hates Part 5, but for whatever reason, that's like my one of my guilty pleasures.
Yeah, I think everybody hated Part 5 until Jason Goes to Hell came out, and then everybody's like, Part 5 is great.
Yeah, still a lot of people give Part 5 a lot of shit, but
yeah.
To me, that's like the epitome of a Friday the 13th movie. It's got everything. It's got big boobs, a cool hockey mask, lots of gore, and a really cool 80s song, which I still dig to this day. But I digress. We'll go back to Friday the 13th Part 2, which is, in my opinion, one of the best Friday films.
Yeah, I would have to say you could go 2 ways with this one. If you're a purist of the Friday the 13th movie, I could see how you could get upset that you're like, well, that's not really a great sequel because the main character is gone or the killer is gone. And I don't know anybody that actually says that. I'm sure there's a few people out there that think, Friday the 13th, the first one is the best movie out of all of them. All those Jason movies are horrible. But I would have to say, even though that this is not my favorite Friday movie in the franchise, that this is probably, and you'll have to hear me out on this one, but of all of the horror sequels out there, I would have to say this is probably one of the better sequels when you actually look at it in terms of being a sequel to the original one. I think the only other one that would probably beat it out would probably be Halloween 2. But this one, keeps the original story intact and doesn't really drift away from it too much, other than, if you can overlook the fact that, Jason was supposedly dead in the first one and he was just a dream at the end of it. But they kind of explain that in this a little bit. They
do, yeah. And this one really is the beginning of the Jason character as we know it. I mean, like in terms of the killer, we got him as a kid, drowning in the lake as a child, and this one sort of, this is the beginning of Jason kind of coming full circle and taking over where his mom left off and becoming the slasher that we, grew to love, and one of our favorite slashers is throughout the 80s and obviously to the present day. But I think this one took the mythology and changed it a bit. And instead of Jason dying, like you said, they make it so he survived, and and it's kind of cool how they do it, because like, Friday the 13th movies at their core are just campfire tales. These are the type of movies that you tell around a campfire while you're out at the tent or whatever with a group of friends, your family or whatever. And this is the ultimate, the scenes where you see all the counselors all together over the fire talking about what happened to the mother and, Jason's mom. And then what if he's still out there? What if he watched the whole thing happen, and then he grew up in the woods, and, and now he's going to avenge his mother's death. And so he never really died. So, and that's sort of where it gives us the Jason out hiding in the woods, and he's become like kind of part of like a survivalist basically, and he's lives in that little shack in the middle of nowhere, and I think it's a great way to kind of carry the franchise, and obviously there was a lot that came of this.
That brings me to the next point I wanted to make about this sequel. This is out of the original Friday movies, excluding the remake, this is really the only one that actually treats Jason as a human or a real person. To even when you even get into part 3, even though he's not supernatural yet in part 3, he's still kind of this mythological being that is just there, and there's no explanation to him at all.
Right.
To whereas this one, like you had said, there's the shack that he's living in the woods. The other thing too that I think gets a little misconstrued with this one is a lot of people tend to think that, when he came out of the water at the end of part 1, then he ran off into the woods. But this movie was supposed to be 5 years after the events of part 1. So there's no way that he went from being a little boy at the end of part 1, a 10-year-old or 12-year-old or whatever he's supposed to being a 25-year-old man in the woods.
Right, yeah.
The whole thing is like he actually never drowned. He somehow ended up in the woods and survived all these years. That's always one of the things with this one's really cool, because even you have, again, going back to that bar scene that we were talking about at the beginning, Amy Steele, she is, kind of having this conversation with the guys. Of course, they're all drunk, so they're like, whatever, you're crazy. But, she's like, can you imagine how mentally disturbed this kid would be if he's still out there, 25 years, just living out in the middle of the woods? Like
that she does a great job of kind of explaining who and what he has become. She does have kind of a funny line in that scene too. What did she call him again? She called him some kind of a retard. Oh gosh, what did she say?
Like something like, was it? No, but yeah, it was something like that though, to where now I'm sure she would never actually use that line. Right. So politically incorrect.
All right, totally. Bringing in the whole like Jason mythology in this film, yeah, because this turns it. It's kind of funny because you look at the Jason films, and the first movie, it leaves you to believe that Jason died as a child. Okay, so that's Jason. Then okay, the second movie up into the fourth movie, Jason he was alive. He was hiding in the woods all that time, saw his mother get killed, and now he's avenging mother's death, and then like the fact that nobody was watching him when he was little. So you've got those, and then you've got 5, which is standalone. It's a copycat killer. Then you've got 6, 7, and 8, and you've got zombie Jason. And then you've got obviously 9, which is screw that one. I don't even want to talk about it. But then you've got 10. He's in space, and then you've got Freddy versus Jason, and he's been dead. So that kind of goes back to more of zombie Jason, I think. But then you've got the remake for Jason, and that kind of goes back all the way back to part 2. He's more of like a survivalist, a guy out in the woods and like living off the land and that kind of thing. So I really like this. I liked where they went with this. I liked how they introduced the character. I will admit, though, and this is one thing I did want to bring up, because I remember the first time I saw this film, Jason had been around. I think we were probably on about part 6 by the time I saw this one. So it was probably like in the 86, 87 when I saw this. And so the hockey mask was already known. And obviously we all know, all us horror fans know that the hockey mask didn't start till part 3. So I remember like, oh, cool. Okay. So I saw the first movie and I'm like, oh, so he was just a little boy in that film. No hockey mask. Okay. And then the second one, I was like, okay, this must be it. And I remember watching that all the way through and then finding out, oh, no hockey mask. And that was kind of a disappointment, because I always bring this up that, I love how, big part of these films is what the monster looks like, what the villain looks like. And, the Jason in this film, he wears this like, potato sack kind of thing with a hole cut out for his eye. And it's creepy. It works, it kind of fits. And it's actually kind of a copy of, it's very reminiscent to the Town That Dreaded Sundown, and also the Elephant Man, who actually wore the same thing. By no way as iconic as the hockey mask. So I think, as they were trying to create this villain and kind of come up with what he's going to look like, and Michael Myers was already out there, and he had his own design. So at this point, the first 2 Halloweens already existed. So they're trying to come up with, okay, what's he going to look like? What's the mask going to be? And they go with this, this pillow sack thing. And it was okay, but like, you could definitely, as the movies progressed, the Jason character's image looked a lot better. So I guess that's probably the only semi disappointment I have in this film, is that we didn't get the hockey mask in this one.
Could you imagine if they never went with the hockey mask and you just had potato sack head for...
Yeah, that would have sucked. It's kind of funny, because in part 3, they were actually, I guess in the script, it just said white mask. So they didn't even have an idea of the hockey mask. And they're obviously, let's face it, the Friday films are basically copies of Halloween, and they're trying to kind of keep up with the slasher thing. But then they somehow got, had a life of their own, and Jason became his own thing and had with a really new image with a hockey mask. And somebody on set had a hockey mask, and that's how they kind of came up with it. And that really gave him like an identity that really stuck. Like, and I don't know that he would have continued on, really, to be honest with you, had they not had that hockey mask, because, it's kind of like Freddy's glove. It's like, it's just so iconic. And, had they not have been able to come up with something like that, I don't know that it would have worked as well.
The rumor I'd always heard was the hockey mask was, like you'd said, somebody had it. They were doing lighting tests, and they knew that they had to have a white mask. And so somebody's like, oh, hey, I have a hockey mask in my trunk. We could use that for the test. And then, like, they put it on, and they're like, that's it. That's what we're going to use. Kind of a thing.
Yeah. Because originally they were doing Jason was, there was a Stan Winston design for Friday Part 3. He looked more like a demon than like a human. He kind of like a monstrous face. And I think they were going to go with that for a lot of the scenes. And actually some of the shots they didn't take away, like they didn't before they switched it back to the more deformed human looking look. But like the scene like in Friday 3 when Jason's walking around the clothesline at the beginning of the film, he's still got the Stan Winston makeup on. And but yeah, like you said, they were doing a lighting test, and they didn't want to put all that makeup on the character, so they just wanted a mask for the lighting test. And there was a hockey fan, I don't know, producer or whoever he was, had it in his bag, and they put it on, and then so they took that hockey mask and they made a cast of it, and I think they made it a little bigger, and they did a few modifications to it, and that's what became the infamous Friday the 13th hockey mask.
Crazy how that all works.
But I love in this film, I love the Jason's little shack in the middle of the woods. I love that. I think that's great. I think that works so well with this film. That's like why like the idea that he lives in this little shithole, and he's got his mother's head on like a shrine there and all that. I mean, just perfect in my opinion.
Could you imagine that you're going to clean up this murder scene at the end of part 1? You have all these dead counselors around, and you're like, okay, so there's Pamela Voorhees' body over there. Where's her head? I don't know. Maybe it fell into the lake. Okay, let's not worry about it. Okay, let's go. And just carrying your mom's head around, like, oh,
Yeah,
there's mom's
I know.
head.
Right.
Oh man, that's just funny because at that point he'd been living in the woods, for how many years? The only problem that I have with that whole like, oh no, he was actually dead. He was living in the woods the whole time, but he watched his mom get killed. If he'd been living in the woods for that whole time, wouldn't you think like if you saw your mom on the beach on the other side of the lake, you'd have been like, Mom,
Right.
I'm here, I'm alive.
I guess Jason had some mental issues.
Yeah, and he never really
weak.
talked, so I guess there's that too.
Yeah, there's that issue as well. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a great, and it's cool because part 2 really takes the Jason lore and turns it into something, that we still talk about to this day. Like, oh yeah, he's been living in the woods. He's saw his mom get decapitated and all of that. So, and really, that's kind of what these films have been riding on for the entire franchise was that. And then part 2, even they use that opening scene or that scene. It's not the opening scene for part 2, but that scene where the camp counselors are around the bonfire and the head counselor is talking about Jason and the legend and all that stuff. They use that I believe they use that at the opening of part 4 as kind of the intro to kind of give you the Jason mythology, and I think they used parts of it in part 7 as well in the opening intro as well. So it shows you that was like kind of, this is like the baseline for who Jason is, why he did what he did, and all of that. You got to give this film credit for really kind of creating a lot of that lore.
When you talk about that shack in the woods and stuff, that's one of those things, not to get too far off track here, but that's actually one of the things that a lot of people were bitching about the remake. Like, oh, you have Jason living in a shack in the woods? He doesn't live in a shack in the woods. Well, he did at one point.
Yes, he did.
I remember that got so much grief when that remake came out that there was so many people that were pissed off about, oh, he's living in the woods and he's living off the land and he has all these tunnels and stuff. Like, but they kind of already said that he did that.
And the remake was actually basically take part 2 through part 4 and just condense it and squeeze them all together, and you kind of had the remake. They took the best parts of all of it. You could like squeeze it in somewhere in there. And yeah, they took like the beginning stuff with 2 and they tried to take some of that to like they even have the sack head, the pillowcase thing, and the shack, and the tunnel thing was one of those things where people were it was sort of like some people thought it was all right and a lot of people didn't like that idea. But I love the idea of Jason being like living off the land and being kind of like a survivalist. And actually, a lot of people compared him to Rambo. Like when they were filming that, they were saying that this Jason's going to be more like a survivalist type character, which he was. Now the remake, I know I don't want to go too much into it, but when I first saw it, I thought it was I enjoyed it. But looking back now, it doesn't hold up as well. And I think the main reason is because it has that whole modern day self-awareness. Like the black guy tells you throughout the film that, oh, guess what? I'm the black guy in the movie, and guess what? I'll probably die first, kind of thing. And then the slut girl, everybody's so stereotypical that it like kind of falls, like the characters fall flat, I think. And I think had they have kind of gone more with the tone of let's not do that whole meta horror thing like the Scream thing, I think it would have been better.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And we'll save that one for another one because we're almost out of Friday movies, and Friday the 13th aren't going to stop happening. So,
yeah, well, hopefully they'll keep making them. But
we'll have to get to that one at some point.
I do want to say real quick, Amy Steele is the final girl. I know you and I have a little bit of a little story about meeting her at Flashback, and and how cool she was, and all of that, and we have sort of that like connection there with her, and we hope to see her again, hopefully soon. But I think she was one of the all-time best Friday final girls. I mean, she really was. Her character as Ginny in this film, she was like the tough female, like smart, intelligent. She was a child psychologist in training and all that. She was great. And she was able to outsmart Jason. And she's probably one of the most memorable final girls in the whole franchise, in my opinion.
The only downside to her character, and this isn't any fault to her at all, actually is one of the things that they did in this movie, which I thought was kind of cool, was at the beginning of this movie, they kind of followed up with Alice from the first Friday movie and kind of showed what happened with her. And then at the end of this movie, everything happens, and then Jenny is alive and kicking. She's being loaded up into the ambulance. And then when part 3 comes out, you have no idea what happened to Jenny. And you're like, what happened to Jenny? Is she okay? Did she have a brain aneurysm on the way to the hospital? Did Jason come and get her? What happened? That's always one of the things that I really wish they would have continued Jenny's story on into part 3, so we would have known what happened with her.
Well, they were going to, and that was the plan was to continue with her in part 3, but she actually turned it down.
Right.
So they changed everything.
They could have still told us, though, like, hey, so, yeah, Jenny died.
What happened? Yeah. I still think, Amy Steele, probably her performance in this one, and this was one of the early Friday films. And, the cool thing about the earlier ones, too, was not only were they not self-aware, like, obviously, like the modern ones, like, you look at Jason X, which, it's whatever, is what it is. I don't really have a huge problem with that one. But then you've, obviously, the remake, which was a okay film, but it just, the whole self-awareness thing was terrible. But part 2 was completely in its time period, like just, they're just playing the parts as if, nobody knows about the idea of a slasher and all that stuff. So it just fits so well in the franchise. So I love this film. I guess my only complaint again is like they hadn't fully defined Jason into who he would become in terms of his image. They were still kind of figuring that out. It didn't happen until part 3, part 4, where we really got the idea of, okay, this is what Jason looks like, the hockey mask and all of that. But yeah, and even this Jason's a bit shorter than the later Jason. This one's more, and he's wearing the overalls and the flannel shirt, and he's more of like the demented hillbilly look too. And I thought his look without the mask was pretty cool as well, because that's another thing with these Friday films is the reveal at the end where he gets the mask taken off and you get to see what he looks like. And I do like the design they came up with for this character. I thought it was pretty creepy, especially with the hair too, like the strands of hair hanging down. Again, this wasn't what we would know or what we would recognize as Jason.
Yeah, I wonder if you took all of the unmasked Jasons and put them in like a lineup with other horror icons that are more famous than not, and not necessarily all unmasked. Pinhead or Freddy are in there. Michael Myers really wouldn't be a real good one because he wasn't really unmasked that often.
Just the original.
Yeah, and
then Zombie, obviously.
How many people would be able to identify the different Jasons?
Oh, I would.
I would too, but I don't know if, especially this one, and probably I would say probably like 3 and 4. I don't think too many people would, but once you got into Zombie Jason and 6 and 7, I think people would be like, oh, hey, that's Jason.
My favorite unmasked Jason was always the final chapter, that was Tom Savini came back for that one. He came up with the original design of the child Jason, and then when they did the final chapter, they thought that it was going to be the final movie in the series. They called him back to do the makeup for it and come up with the adult Jason, and his take on it, I thought was the best of all of them. Like part 3 was like, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't that great. It kind of it lacked a little bit. But the part 4 Jason looks, in my opinion, is the best unmasked. And then the follow-up one that I think was great was the part 7, and that's a zombie Jason, but they did such an over-the-top version without the mask. I mean, you cannot, see that film and not remember what he looked like.
Right.
It was. But this part 2 version, kind of like, you only see him at the very, very end of the film when he jumps through the window and grabs Amy. And, it's kind of a slow motion shot, but I think it was effective. I think it was a cool look and everything. And it's kind of cool that they didn't, you didn't get a good full look at it like throughout the film. It kind of kept it for the end to kind of give you that reveal. It's kind of cool to see the evolution of Jason. That's kind of where they started with the adult version of Jason. He's this kind of deformed hillbilly guy. And then he got taller throughout the franchise, but
well, he wasn't ungrown yet.
Yeah, that could be it. He might have been just 13, maybe.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, I did like that they went with a completely different look for him at the end of part 2 than they did at the original, just because it kind of, like they had said, like, oh, actually that wasn't him, and he didn't really drown. So I always thought that was cool. But that's one of my biggest complaints with these horror movies is all the time every movie is directed by somebody different. It's not all of them, but a lot of them are.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, except for the Hellraiser franchise, which was the same guy who played, Pinhead throughout all the movies, except for the latest one, which isn't out yet. But,
right.
You have all these different looks. How hard is it to make the guy look the same as he did in the other one? I mean, take A Nightmare on Elm Street is a prime example, because Robert Englund played Freddy Krueger throughout all of the original Nightmare on Elm Street movies, yet he looks different in almost every one of them. It's not that hard to get the look right. There
is some, continuity issues with that. They did it was kind of funny because, like the look without the mask, yeah, that changes for sure. But like 3 and 4, they kept the costume look pretty close. I mean, they kept it good. I mean, that was like a good transition. Like you could, like the actual hockey mask was actually the same hockey mask used in both films, so that was cool. And then, the outfit, the work shirt and pants were the same for the most part. Look, and the boots and all that. And then part 5, obviously, it's its own beast. Part 6, and then part 6 and part 7, they actually, hockey mask wise, they do keep it accurate. Again, Jason without the mask, a different story, but they kept that the same, and it was a transition to the next thing. And then part 8, it was a whole new hockey mask, so that worked. But yeah, again, like the whole unmasking was always a different thing. But with the Friday films, I think they did a much better job with the mask, with the hockey mask, over the years than they did with the Halloween films, where they just kind of screwed up the mask, where it just looked completely off in each film. It wasn't like it was like a completely different mask design. Yeah.
If you want to see exactly what we're talking about with that without watching the movies, go to Trick or Treat Studios' website. They're the ones who have the licensing for the Halloween masks. And look at the different masks. I mean, they look different when you look at, I don't think they have the original Halloween mask listed, but they have like the Halloween 2 mask. They have a couple of different Halloween 2 masks. And then they have like a Halloween 4, Halloween 5, and then like Halloween 6 and Halloween Resurrection masks. They're all completely different.
Yeah, it's different. And then now, with this new Halloween film coming out, the fans, a lot of the purists like me, like it's the Shatner mask or nothing for me, in my opinion, like are concerned about, okay, well, what's the new mask going to look like? Because it's a new sculpt. They're obviously not using a Shatner mask because they don't exist anymore. Kind of a cool thing, you sent me the link, and I was just completely blown away because I hadn't been following up with that, and I read that like probably 5 times in a row. And Sean Clark has seen the new mask, and apparently he likes it, and his taste in masks in terms of the franchise is very similar to mine. And so I'm hoping that him saying he likes it means that it's really, really close to the original look.
Yeah, we'll see, I guess, in a couple of months here.
We'll find out soon. Yeah.
Before we completely wrap up, there's just a couple of things I wanted to touch on. The first one, before we get too far off topic, with Friday 2, is one of the things that I always feel, even though I know we kind of touched on this already a little bit, which I think is a cool thing that they did at the beginning of this movie, is they kind of give the backstory to what happened to Alice after the events of the first one. You know, she's at home by herself and talking to her mom on the phone, ends up meeting her demise via the hands of Jason. But one of the things that I always think of every time I watch Friday the 13th Part 2 is, do you think that scene was originally planned when they started making this movie? Like, oh, hey, okay, so we're going to start this movie off. We're going to let the fans know what happened to Alice, and then we're going to jump a couple years in the future and show what's going on with Jason. Or do you think that they shot all of the other stuff and they were like, well, we only have 75 minutes of movie here. We need another 10 minutes. Oh, let's do this Alice scene.
That's interesting to say. I don't know, and I read somewhere that, what's her name? Adrienne King.
Yep.
The original, the woman who played Alice, she had a stalker, and I think that prevented her from playing in films. I think she turned down a lot of movies because of that. So she kind of got out of the industry for a long time because of that issue. I don't know if she was, if it was going to be, she was going to have a bigger scene or not. That's something we need to look into. I honestly don't know. I think because the way it's filmed, obviously it's just a segue into the next chapter of the movie. But that's a good question.
Yeah, because the only reason why I say that is because when you watch, Part 3, Part 4, they kind of have that introductory sequence at the beginning of the movie where they kind of show flashback clips from the other movies. And even though there was a little bit of some of that in Part 2, it was this whole, it wasn't just that. It was also this whole sequence of, this is modern day. This is Alice. She's at her house by herself. And then, Jason tracked her down.
Right.
Every time I watch it now that I'm older, I always think, like, I wonder if that was originally planned or if that was, just kind of a time filler to where they were like, yeah, we got to add 10 minutes to this movie. Maybe if we go to flashback this year or next year and Adrienne King is there again, we'll have to, hey, Adrienne, so what happened with that scene?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. We'll have to ask her if we do see her. And she was one that I regret not getting her autograph, being the first in the Friday Girls. So I think that should be my goal for, well, I can't say this year because we only go to one convention a year. So I want to get like all the Friday Girls, well, at least the first, well, I don't know if I need the girl from Part 8 because I don't really care, but at least the first 7 Friday Girls, I need all of their autographs.
So you're gonna get what's his faces who played Tommy in Part 6. Is that what you said?
I don't need his really. I want to do all the. I want to. Well, the chick that he's with. What was her? Megan.
Yep.
I don't know her real name, but I'd like to get her. I'd like to get Adrienne King. I'd like to get the girl who played Chris, Dana Kimmel from Part 3, and I would like to get Lars Park Lincoln from Part 7. She would be really cool to get. Yeah,
she would be cool to get. I don't know if I've ever. I'm sure she does conventions. Her name is one of those I don't ever see pop up anywhere, though, unfortunately.
She did them earlier. I know that because I've watched some videos of her on YouTube doing them. And then the one thing we were going to bring up, too, I know as we're wrapping up here, is the new Friday films seem to be kind of lingering still. And I guess like right now, like, that there's it's been like in development hell, this new Friday film. They're trying to come up with a new concept, and there's, they had a few that were started and then it kind of stopped. And now, like, I guess the rights are going to be transferred over to another studio, which kind of complicates things, and then also Victor Miller, I believe that's the original screenwriter
Yep.
of the first original film. There's some legal stuff going on with him where he wants to get some rights to it. So that's kind of holding everything up. But I think, to be honest with you, I think this year, this October, when this new Halloween comes out, which is basically, in my opinion, it's like the Halloween, The Force Awakens version. It's kind of like the reboot with the same template as the original film, and bringing back some of the old actors and actresses. And, I think it's kind of like that thing. I think if this thing does well, which I'm expecting it to do pretty damn well, it's not going to do like It numbers, but I think it's going to do pretty well. I think that'll definitely be the Kickstarter for Friday to get their shit together.
I hope so. I really do. I hope that if that does happen, though, even though we're seeing this with other films right now, that I hope that this new Halloween movie is good, and I hope it's great. I hope it's not just a big fanboy, Easter egg treasure trove to where,
right,
the 50 people that are like, Halloween's my favorite. Not more than 50, of course, but one of my kids could go see this movie and be like, that was a good movie, to where you don't have to be like so invested into Halloween like we are to enjoy the movie. But I also hope that even if it is successful, that it doesn't start this whole trend where everybody's going to be like, oh, okay, so instead of doing a reboot, which I would love for these people to get away from reboots, and if you want to do a sequel, that's great, but get away from doing this, we're going to do this direct sequel to the original movie, and we're going to ignore everything else, but we're going to put these little references to all the other movies in there. I don't want to see that, though, either. It's so weird. It's like this.
Yeah,
I feel like a grumpy old man where I'm like, don't do that. Well, don't do that either. God damn it. Stop it.
Well, you know what? We might get, again, going back to this Halloween, we're in the new phase in Hollywood of the alternate timeline. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they did like a Friday the 13th, they're going to definitely need the hockey mask. So let's say, we're going to do a part 4, we're going to start from where at the end of part 3 and go from there, and maybe get like Dana Kimmel back to, reprise her role as Chris and be like, 50-year-old Dana Kimmel or 60-year-old Dana Kimmel against Jason. And I wouldn't be surprised if they went down that route, because it seems like that's the new trend.
Well, and the one thing that the Friday the 13th movies could get away with, other than other horror movies, is you could actually do that because there is no specific timeline given for any of the movies.
Right.
Outside of 1 and 2, we haven't got to this point yet, but we'll get there eventually. But you were talking about Jason X earlier, and one of the kind of interesting things with the Jason X movie was when Jason X happened, the Friday franchise was owned by New Line at that time, and they were trying to work this Freddy versus Jason crossover into the mix, which had been teased at the end of Jason Goes to Hell, but there was all these problems at the time, and so they were like, okay, well, let's go ahead and do another Jason movie while we're waiting to figure this stuff out. And so they said, well, how are we going to do that? Because we're going to make this other Jason and Freddy movie. And they said, just put it in the future. So they so they made this movie that's like 400 years in the future. So that way they covered the time gap so all this other stuff could happen, and they don't ever have to explain it. But but one of the other things with Friday the 13th movies is, there's a couple of obvious Friday the 13th movies that happen the day after. For the most part, Friday the 13th movie happen on Friday the 13th at some month in the summer. And if you actually try to figure it out, I think they said what was if I remember right, between the first one and maybe it was the 8th one or something, supposedly 90 years had passed or 60 years had passed or something. It was
some ridiculous
thing. To whereas, with the Freddy movies and Halloween and stuff, that kind of stuff was kind of...
It kept it within like a year or the same
or
night or whatever, yeah.
like when they hit, okay, so this is Laurie Strode's 10-year-old daughter who he's going after,
Right.
kind of a thing. So the nice thing about the Friday the 13th movies is they could theoretically come in and say like, okay, we're gonna do this horror movie that happened in 1985. And, you're not going to really necessarily interrupt any of the other storylines unless you throw in names of people. What if you do like, oh, this is Tina from Part 7 and she's, 12 in this movie or something. I don't know.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to touch on real quick, just to throw this out there, and these guys aren't a sponsor of ours or anything, but this popped up yesterday as I was doing some research for this show, and it's kind of unrelated, but it's really cool. Waxworks Records, which is a company that started up, I don't even think 10 years ago. They put out a bunch of horror movie scores on vinyl, and they started putting out the Friday the 13th movies on the scores for those on vinyl a couple of years ago, and I have scores from the first one through part 4 all on vinyl, and it's really cool. The artwork's really cool. The vinyls are cool. Mm-hmm. Sound is great, all that stuff. They announced yesterday that they are putting out a vinyl for part 5.
Nice.
I would assume it will be announced. The release date the pre-order probably will start roughly around the time that this episode is released, since how this is going to be coinciding with the April 13th, Friday the 13th of 2018.
Too cool.
So that'd be cool.
Very cool. Absolutely cool.
All right. I give this one a giant thumbs up.
Oh, yeah. I want to give this one 2 thumbs up just because. Well, yeah, and again, Amy Steele, I know we didn't go too much into it, but she is a legend. She is amazing, and we can't get enough Amy Steele. And this is her this is her at her best.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Talk to you guys later.
See ya.